Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions every Wednesday from whenever I can get here until about 10 o'clock. We talk about things that affect you in your daily lives, some of the economic and financial issues that occur that may cause an impact to you when you're trying to deal with things that are happening locally. Some of the international issues or national issues, or just some of the local issues that come up that may have a financial impact on you and your life. And we try to do it, try to make it a little bit non-political, but I always say that. I'm going to stop saying it because we always talk something that has to do with politics. And today I'm probably going to talk definitely about politics. But it's trying to, but we do welcome some discussion. And this morning in particular, welcome discussion. The number in the studio, by the way, is 220-9788, 220-WSTU. Mike will be happy to take your call, and we'll get you on the air and air it out, so to speak. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a local CPA, an ex-banker, and all of those kind of good things, and have been living in the world of finance and economics pretty much since college. So, and now that I'm older, that's a long time. Not quite as old as WSTU, but pretty old. Anyway, the what I wanted to kind of get into today is the whole issue of democracy and the concept of democracy versus a republic. And some of the issues there, I really struggle sometimes with how some people are looking at what we are right now. And as much as a lot of people are critical of the United States, it is still, and we're embarrassed to say it sometimes, but it still is kind of the shining beacon of what people can accomplish. And it's not about what a country can accomplish, because that's what a lot of things are. They're about what a country can accomplish, but about what a people can accomplish. And that is largely due to the way that our forefathers established the country and how it works. And it was a balancing act. And it was designed to be a perfect union, actually, is the term we hear thrown around. But it was designed to be a balancing act, not where the people individually would control, because the government realized that if you did it that way, the founding fathers realized if you did it that way, that certain areas, certain types of lifestyles would be put at a disadvantage versus others, because everybody's economic interest, their personal economic interest, is not uniform throughout the United States. So the idea behind this thing was a balance between the people and the states and the federal government. And then within the government, it was a balance between Congress, the courts, and the executive branch. And it's funny because I know a lot of things that we attribute to, regardless of how you believe politically, when it comes to the Supreme Court, there is a group that believe that you should interpret the Constitution the way that it was written, and more of a literal interpretation of the Constitution. And there's others that say that no, that it's just a guide, and we need to allow the Supreme Court to change the Constitution if it doesn't apply. Or if it's not specific. So if it wasn't specifically addressed in the Constitution, then then rather than try to look at the Constitution and see what they intended relative to that, the idea was that, well, then just to kind of ignore it and do what you think is right now. And it's kind of funny. There's some uh, there's some corollary there in the business community, in the accounting field. In the accounting field, the accounting standards that we live by, and I know this isn't the Constitution, but it is for accountants. The standards that we live by originally were more principle based. They came up with a very specific set of principles, and then your job was to determine what the accounting treatment was based on those principles that were set up. And there was a little latitude there, but it was all based on these guiding principles. And so you couldn't just say, well, that principle doesn't apply anymore, we're going to throw it out. No, that's not the way it works. You have to look at those principles and all of the other principles and say, okay, how would this situation be handled under these principles? And then for a long time, our accounting profession changed to the point that it became rules based. In other words, it was like, well, we don't care what the principles are. This is the way you're going to do it because this is different. And so we're going to do it this way. And so now for years, the accounting profession has been subjected to a lot of abuse because rules can be avoided. And so many, many big companies, i.e. Enron, there's a perfect example of somebody following the rules. And a lot of people don't think that that's the case. And they actually did Enron committed illegal acts. But Enron itself was following the accounting rules the way they were written, not the principles. If they had been going by principles, they would have said, no, these entities should have been consolidated. We should have treated these things differently. But the CPAs were lazy, and they point to a set of rules and say, well, they followed the rules. This is under 3%. So therefore, this rule says we have to do it this way. I don't care that it doesn't make sense, but we have to do it this way. So what happens is in my opinion, the Constitution is the principles that we're supposed to live by. And we're supposed to determine whether or not the situation is addressed by the overall principle. We're not supposed to make law, though, because that's why the founding fathers did not want the Supreme Court making rules, creating law. They didn't want that because it overrides the system. Because Congress is supposed to make laws. And if they don't do that, which they haven't done very well in the last number of years, then they need to be thrown out because that's their job. And in actuality, even within Congress, the House is supposed to represent what the people would like to see done. They're the ones that are supposed to write the laws and propose the laws that the people want done. The Senate was originally there and still is there supposedly to protect the states. That's why there's two of them from every state. That's why the states, kind of have equal representation. That's why there's not 10 senators from the state of New York or from California. There are two. And it's their job to represent their state's interest on an equal basis with other states, not on a weighted basis. That's in the House. The House has the ability, based on the number of people and where they're elected from, they have the ability to do what the people in total want done. But that doesn't mean that that's what the people in a certain state want done. And so if I've chosen to, let's say, for example, I grew up in a small town, I want to live in a small town. I believe that's right for my family. That's the kind of thing I want to do. So I've sacrificed maybe income. I've sacrificed some of the benefits that I might get out of a very large municipality or a city government. I've given up the opera. I've given up Broadway, all of those kind of things. And I've given up a lot of other things potentially because I choose to live in more of a rural environment. I choose to raise my kids in a rural environment. I choose to have my school system teaching certain things the way that I personally, and a lot of my neighbors, of course, want them taught. Those rights I have, even though those rights are governed by the state. And I have a right within the state government to elect my governor, to elect my state senators, to elect my state representatives. And they then represent me. They represent my interests from my county or my little area, and they then represent the overall state's interests. But at least it's being applied at the state level. But that can be overridden by the federal government. And our founding fathers didn't want that to happen. And they put all these checks and balances in place. One of the big checks and balances is that the senators, the federal senators, were appointed by the states, not elected by the people. We already had representatives elected by the people. That was the people's voice. So if all of those people were living in Fort Lauderdale, then you're going to get a lot of push from Fort Lauderdale to do things probably that are good for the people that live in South Florida. But that is going to be overridden by the fact that the state senators, in general, there's fewer of those, and they're elected and distributed more across the state. So then the Panhandle has some representation. And North Florida has some representation. And that was the concept, to create a balancing act. The governor is elected by the people. So, with that process, it gives you a little bit more control here at the state level. The people have more control at the state level as a total. It's closer to a democracy than a republic, but it's still more of a republic at the state level. But that gives the people the ability to have their state run the way it wants without the federal government saying to them, you need to do this. You need to, you need to teach your kids these certain things. You need to have these certain types of benefits. You need to have these certain types of programs. You need to have these certain types of rules and regulations. Well, if that doesn't make sense, for example, I grew up in Illinois. The Midwest is a big ag area. There's no way in heck that the people in New York and LA really care about what's involved in running a farm. They have no idea. And they have no idea of what, in fact, frankly, given an opportunity to vote, they would probably vote to eliminate my farm because they don't want me to have cows. Well, obviously we're destroying the world if we have cows. So what I'm saying is, the founding fathers recognized that they didn't want that to happen. They had come from an environment where that did happen. They came from an environment where somebody told them that they couldn't do such and such, or if they did, they had to do it this way. So they were told that if they wanted to believe in God, they had to believe in God a certain way. If they wanted to do shipping, they had to do shipping in a certain way. And it had to have a certain fee attached to it. And it could only be done under certain criteria. And so our founding fathers created this really, really cool way of making sure that everything kind of was balanced out. Now, sometime in the 40s, I think, not the 1840s, it was, I think, the 1940s, we eliminated the appointing of the senators by the states. We decided to elect them. And frankly, ever since then, we've had a problem. The balance is out of whack because what's happened now is the senators don't answer to the states anymore. So they don't have to really present the interest of the states. But because there's only two of them in every state, they're way more powerful than they should be. In other words, what we've done with our senators is create an environment where those senators have become extremely powerful. They don't answer to the state. They answer to the people, so to speak. But because there's so few of them and it's such a large campaign, they tend to answer to whoever's given them money, and big money. So what's happening, unfortunately, is our senators are controlled by the money, and they're not controlled by the people per se. They're elected by the people, and to get elected by the people, they need a lot more money to do it. than, for example, the local House races. And so they raise a lot of money. And when you raise a lot of money, you're beholding to a lot of people. And so now what we've created is a way too powerful senator in the process. And we're not creating senators that representing states. So we didn't create a situation where the states are more powerful. We actually did just the opposite. We took the states out of it because let's say that all of the people in Fort Lauderdale and let's say in Orlando want a certain thing done by our senator, by our senator, then that senator has to be beholding to those people in Fort Lauderdale and those people in Orlando, even if that's not what the rest of the state wants. And I'll give you a good example of this. There are people that live in the panhandle of Florida, believe it or not. Most of you probably don't know that because you've never gone to the panhandle of Florida. The panhandle of Florida is very rural, right? It is very, very rural. So there's not a lot of people paying taxes up there. And so as a result, and also there's not a lot of people voting up there. So when it comes time to elect people to represent us, if the panhandle doesn't have some relatively balanced vote, so that they have an opportunity, for example, to appoint or elect a state senator that's going to have some more or less balance with other state senators, they have no say in what happens. And the large municipal areas like Jacksonville and Orlando and Miami and Fort Lauderdale and West Palm Beach, frankly, would all control what happens. So what would happen? Well, first of all, they would get no school funding, because if the school funding was not set up to protect the panhandle, because their property values are so low, if, for example, our legislature just went in and said, from now on, every county gets to keep the revenue they generate for their schools. It doesn't go to Tallahassee and get redistributed. We all get to keep it, right? That would be great for Martin County. We would have tons of money. We would have a lot of money. Our kids would get hopefully a good education. We would have the ability to provide a lot of resources. We'd have a ability to provide a lot of facilities. We'd have ability to pay our teachers a lot more money. And, and I think, frankly, you'd be able to get even a better level of education than you currently get in Martin County. And it's already pretty good. But if you chose not to live in Martin County and you chose to live in Pensacola, for example, or if you're in the military and you're forced to live in Pensacola or somewhere up in that area, you're not going to necessarily have any of that. You're not going to get that benefit because your property values aren't high enough. So you're not going to be able to afford a new school when it's necessary. You're not going to be able to afford to pay your teachers a good wage. So the people who may have thought about staying in their rural community and continuing to teach would leave. They're going to go to Orlando or to Jacksonville or to Martin County because they're going to be paid more. They're going to have a nicer place to play and they're going to have a nicer place to stay. So the government is all based on balances. It's all based on that whole concept of balance. And I hate to see us tear it up because right now, unfortunately, the only protector of state rights at this point is generally the Supreme Court, and to some larger degree, the Electoral College, and that's what I'm getting at. I hear people say, the people should elect the president, not this Electoral College. The election was stolen. The people voted and they wanted somebody else. Yeah. I mean, think about it a minute. If a president was elected by the popular vote, why would I campaign in Iowa? Why would I campaign in Wyoming? Why would I campaign in any state that doesn't have a lot of people? Because all I got to do is throw all of when you start looking at it, All I got to do is throw all of my financial resources into certain states, or certain, even not even states, cities generally, but in certain states that have a large amount of population. If I spent all of my dollars in California, New York, Florida, Illinois to some degree, probably, I'd say some degree in the Northeast. If I spent all of my time there, I've got the bulk of the population. So all I need is a popular vote. I don't care that somebody in Iowa doesn't vote for me, because their vote doesn't count.
You're not campaigning there now with the Electoral College. You're campaigning in 5 or 6 states, maybe 7 states that are swing states, and that's pretty much it.
So nobody's going to New Hampshire. Nobody's going to Iowa.
That's a swing state.
They're not swing. They're only swing state. They're not swing states because of population. They're swing states because you need to carry those. You need to carry those because it's.
But the fact of the matter is, there's a handful of states that are being campaigned in right now, and if you were to get rid of the Electoral College, yeah, some states would not have people campaigning in. You're changing the states that people are going to be campaigning in, but at least every vote would matter.
No, they wouldn't. That's what
of course they would.
No, that's what I'm saying. They wouldn't.
But you're wrong. Of course they would.
No, they won't.
They don't matter. A vote in a state right now, most votes in Texas, California, do not matter right now.
Well, that's not true.
That is true.
Because Texas has a lot of electoral votes.
But that state is not in doubt. It's becoming more purple over time, but it is not in doubt. California is not in doubt.
No, Mike, you're talking politics now. You're talking politics now, not election procedures. That's what I'm talking about. From a politics standpoint, the way our system is right now, all of those states count. And all of those people count. And some count more than others. Michigan, Wisconsin, all of those count because the populace of their state is pretty much could go either way. And under the Electoral College, you need those votes from the Electoral College, and it's kind of a winner takes all type situation. All right, so you need those votes. But what I'm saying to you is, if we elected nationwide, we didn't care what in individual state, there's no Electoral College votes. Those people don't make any difference, because if I carry New York City, I can carry the Eastern Seaboard. Frankly, the rest of the states don't make a difference. If I carry New York City and Florida, and I carry LA and San Francisco, basically, I don't need the rest of the state. I don't need the Midwest.
That argument holds true for the Electoral College as well.
Right. Well,
so it's, I mean, of course it does. You can win the state of New York by winning winning New York City. You can win the state of Florida by winning a handful of places. And there are a lot of states where it's just irrelevant, your vote. No, your vote is totally irrelevant if you are in any state. And if you're an independent,
no.
If you're an independent, your vote is irrelevant in any of the states.
No, it's not.
It is.
It is absolutely is not, because here's the problem. It would be irrelevant if you just voted for the person in general. If it was an election of the people, because here's the problem. If I live let's say I live in Wyoming, okay? I don't know how many voters there are in Wyoming. There's probably 3 million voters in Wyoming.
Okay.
So let's say I'm in Wyoming, and let's say Wyoming has 3 Electoral College votes or whatever it is. Okay. It's small, but let's say it has 3 or whatever. So now I'm in Wyoming, and I'm part of that 3 million, and me and another 1,500,000 people decide we want to elect Hillary Clinton. Okay. So all 3 of our Wyoming votes are going to go to Hillary Clinton. Okay. They're all going to go to her. All right. But now, if I go to New York City and there's 10 million people, or whatever the number of the population of New York City is, the population of New York City is larger than the state of Wyoming. All right. So I go to New York City, and I campaign only in New York City, and I pander to whatever everybody in New York City wants. And New York City wants Trump. Okay. So all of those 10 million votes, or 5 million of them, let's say, go to Trump. New York has just made Wyoming unusable, not necessary, because all I got to do is carry those 10 million votes. So I just go to those big cities and I say to them, here, you elect me, I will give you free schools, free this, I will give you free this, free that. And then you say, fantastic. That sounds great to me. I could use that. And we're going to have minimum wage here, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. And so all I do is just convince 10 million people to vote for me. And now I've wiped out Wyoming, I've wiped out New Hampshire, I've wiped out Vermont. None of those states make any difference anymore because they don't carry any weight in the voting process. Because those major municipalities far outweigh those little states. So what I'm saying is, without the Electoral College, your vote doesn't count because you could be outvoted by New York City. It's one thing for me to get outvoted by another 1.5 million people within the state of Wyoming, but at least those are people who live where I live and have some of the general feeling about the state that I have. But my votes now and their votes now become meaningless because some major city, if I just carry that city, I can carry the Eastern Seaboard. And that's what I'm talking about. It becomes when you start, and then everything then is skewed to basically where the large population groups are. And you've taken away the small states who are part of the United States, and people live there that deserve to be, recognized. For example, in Wyoming and Utah and some of those states, the people really care about the environment and they care about the preserving aspects of the environment. That's not necessarily true in other areas. So, they should have a right to live in a state where they want to spend money on what they want to spend it on. It's the same thing with the state of Washington, right? I mean, the people in Seattle believe very heavily in certain principles. If Washington, and because that state is not that large, if it didn't have any say in electing the president because it's not large enough population-wise, then, at that point, they're kind of those people are cheated out of doing what they want to do, having it run the way they want it to run, because they've chosen not to live in New York City or Boston or LA or San Francisco or any of the major cities. It's the same thing with Florida. Florida is becoming more and more powerful and would become more and more powerful because we have a larger and larger population base. We have certainly different interests in Florida than somebody in downstate Illinois or in Iowa. We're just in a different world. It's why we have problems in Congress, in the federal Congress. It's why we have problems getting resources allocated to us for Lake Okeechobee and for some of the things there, because somebody up in Wyoming or somebody in Illinois says, hey, I don't have a beach. I don't have this problem. I don't care. I want the money to go to my project, right? Well, they have a right to want that. But if we elected all of those people, if we had that control, what do you think the chances are that they'd have any say in it? None. The biggest states would determine what happens. And the biggest municipalities within those states would be where the resources would go. And I'm talking not only the resources after the election, but the resources before the election. Because I can save a lot of money if I'm not traveling to Iowa and I'm not traveling to New Hampshire. Frankly, nobody would ever go to New Hampshire. Why would you go there? If you can go to, instead of going to New Hampshire and spending a month in New Hampshire or a month in Iowa, if you could just spend a month in LA and a month in New York, you could get a lot more votes. But you have to go to New Hampshire because it has some say. And you have to go to Iowa because it has some say. And you have to go to Michigan and you have to go to Wisconsin. And when you take those guys for granted, you end up with what we got. And that's what happens. That was a situation where politicians took states for granted. And they took the state for granted, maybe not the people in the state, but they took the state for granted. And as a result, it made a difference in the election. And you're right, the way it is right now, it definitely makes a difference in the election. But, from a practical standpoint, it's a balance. It's a check and balance so that everybody doesn't have to live in an area that they don't want to live in, that they can choose to have the lifestyle and the independence that they want. And that was true when we had 13 colonies that became 13 states, and it's true today. But what we've done is we've stripped away one of the big balancing acts in that, and that was the senators. If we strip away the Electoral College, then states don't make any difference. Absolutely make no difference at all because they have no effect on any of the voting. So that's not to say that some state that the people in the state aren't important, but it is saying that the people in that state don't make as much difference as the people in other states and in other cities. So we would become an urban society by choice because the urban communities would elect our elected officials. So everything would be structured such that it would favor urban living and it would not favor people who choose to live in a rural environment or choose to live in a vacation environment like Florida or someplace like that, or retirement environment. It wouldn't favor them. It would tend to favor those people who lived in the large municipalities. And that's all I'm saying. It's just, I mean, it does make a difference the way it's structured. And it seems like a small difference, but this last election, whether you like the outcome or not, and it could have gone either way. But the fact of the matter is, this election, the states of Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania made a huge difference in the election. Whereas had that been the popular vote, they would have made no effect on the election.
That's not true, though.
If it had been
and that's just categorically untrue. Okay. Because how many
who would have been elected if it was based on popular vote?
Well, if it was based on popular vote, it would have been Clinton because she won the popular vote.
Right.
But those people in those states voted; those votes would have still counted.
No,
they absolutely would have been. That is, you can't say that votes wouldn't count. They would count towards the total.
They would count towards the total, but they would not have counted towards who got elected. In other words, they would have counted towards the total, but that's not who the state wanted elected. That's not who the people in the state wanted elected. That's my point. The state would have had no say in it. Wisconsin as a state would have had no say in it. The people.
Wisconsin as a state. Wisconsin, the votes from Wisconsin would have counted. You can't make the blanket statement that without the Electoral College, those votes wouldn't count because the fact of the matter is they go towards the total. It is the basic of the idea of going to the popular vote is that every vote counts.
Okay, now so here's the thing I got though, Mike. So who did Wisconsin electoral votes go to?
It went to Trump.
Right. The popular vote went to Clinton, right?
For the nation, yes.
Right. So if the popular vote, so the Electoral College votes within Wisconsin went to Trump, and as a result helped elect Trump. So the people in Wisconsin who appointed those people to the Electoral College, who favored Trump from their standpoint, they got their vote counted because their guy got elected. Had that not been in play, Hillary Clinton would have got elected and their vote wouldn't have counted for anything. It would have counted as part of the popular, but it wouldn't have been enough to offset the votes from New York and Massachusetts and other places that would have offset them.
You're twisting yourself in knots. That's the same exact thing as saying that everybody who voted for Hillary Clinton in the state of Florida didn't get a say in the election.
They didn't.
Okay, so now you're saying, so then by your very definition right there, the Electoral College eliminates a lot of people from having their vote count.
No.
Everybody who you just said, everybody that voted for Clinton in the state of Florida, their vote didn't count under the Electoral College.
It did not.
But it would have counted. But it would have counted had it come down to the plain popular vote.
Right.
So every vote would count under the popular vote.
No, every vote would have counted.
Okay.
No, every vote would have counted, Mike. But that's not what the state of Florida wanted. That's my point. You're looking at the people and saying the vote counted, so it should have counted. But what it would have counted in the election, but it didn't because the state. We are a state. And we as a state decided who we wanted to vote for. So the person's vote counted would have counted in a national election.
So states' rights are more important than people's rights.
They're equal.
Well, clearly not.
And they should be. And that's what I'm saying. They should be. Because you as a state have a right to elect the president. And so it's the state's vote that didn't count. That's my point that I'm making. You eliminate the Electoral College and the state has no vote. The people get to vote, but the state has no vote. They have no control. So now at this point, that politician that we elected is not beholden to the state any longer. Why do you think that the Democrats are even bothering to go back to Wisconsin and Michigan? Because their vote does now matter. But if it didn't, if we had no Electoral College, I guarantee you they wouldn't care what was going on up there. They would go to their base, and they would go to that base who they know are going to vote for them and whose votes they need. And that's where they would go. And that's my point. You're exactly right. The person's vote still counted, but the state's vote didn't count or wouldn't count if there was no electoral college. And the state has to have rights. We have to have a vote, because not everybody chooses to live in New York or Boston or Massachusetts. We choose to live where we want to raise our families, with our lifestyle, with our religions, with whatever we want, with how we believe about schools and education. And that's what that's what our founding fathers wanted. They wanted that independence. They wanted us to have the ability to have a say in our own lives, where we live and how we live it. They didn't want every state to become agriculture or every state to become urban, whatever. They wanted people to be able to choose. In those days, it was actually choice by religion, but it was the right to choose. And so that's all I'm saying. And that's what I think people are grasping, is that if we take away the electoral college, we take away the vote for the state. And that is important in our form of government, because otherwise the masses would rule. And the problem with a democracy is that in a democracy, you will not necessarily get fair. You will get what the majority believes, but the majority can be bullies from time to time. So if I have the majority, I can bully, and I don't have to back off, even if it affects, in our case, other states. But if I have to get a state vote and not just a popular vote, then I have to try to provide something that state wants, where I don't have to do that if I'm based on a popular vote. And that's all I'm saying. It's a part of the system that really, it's a fundamental change in the system if we change it. And frankly, I wouldn't want to do it. I would not want to live in a country that was governed by a federal government that as a state, I was not going to have a say in that. As a person, I would have a say, but my say wouldn't be that big, because I'm just one of millions of people. But as one of less millions of people in the state, I can elect state officials. I can elect my electoral college. My vote makes a difference. And that's why, in the 40s, when we eliminated the appointing of the senators by the states, it made a significant change in Congress. So there's already a loss of that branch. That was supposed to be a co-equal branch between individual rights and state rights. That's what the Congress is supposed to be about. It is now just about individual rights. So the only thing that's left is the Supreme Court, which has the opportunity to make decisions relative to whether or not something is constitutional or unconstitutional, and the Constitution is largely still in favor of state rights, or the executive branch. Now we take the electoral college out. We've now taken the president and the executive branch out of that balance. It's now popular vote. So now we have the country run by popular vote. The next thing to do would be just to elect the representatives to the Supreme Court, or put term limits on them, so that every so often we could all, as a population, decide how the Supreme Court should vote. And that's, and that potentially is coming. I mean, every time, we've got into this situation, every time those state rights have gone away, it's been the Supreme Court that's pretty much been the bastion of the protection of the state rights. And now, if those go away, then the states have no say in the thing. And I think that there's many people in the United States that would probably have a problem with that. Unfortunately, most people won't recognize it until it happens. And because it's a small change right now. It's a small change. But it will be a cascading change if it's done. Because, for example, let's say that we change to popular vote. Initially, everybody still lives where everybody lives. And so the difference will not be as significant. It can change an election like it has in the past, going from electoral to popular. But right now, it's kind of still distributed. All right. But as that goes away, and as it becomes solely popular vote, more and more people, particularly young people, will be forced to move to larger areas. They'll be forced to move to more municipal areas, because that's where the jobs will be. That's where the higher paying jobs will be. That's where the benefits will be. So as a young person, Your choice is you can live here in Florida and get, and not necessarily have some of the benefits that you can have. Your transportation costs will be higher here in Florida because of the fact that you don't have public mass transportation. It's unlikely that the federal government is going to put mass transportation in all of Florida. They certainly will subsidize, especially if you're going to get votes. I would subsidize that mass transportation in New York or in Boston or LA. Why? Because I'm going to get votes out of it. So my point is the dollars go where the votes go. The more and more the dollars are going to get the votes, the more and more the people will then subsequently have to also follow the dollars. And what will happen is it'll become polarized and it'll become less distributed. And those people that live in ag communities in Iowa and in Illinois and parts of Kentucky and those kind of things, they won't. There's no way any resources are going to be allocated to them, and because they don't have enough people, they don't make a difference because farms are not small family farms anymore. They're large corporate organizations, so they just don't have the personnel any longer. So, it's a sad thing, I think, because it seems like a little deal and it seems fair. Well, it's only fair that the people should elect the president. But see, our founding fathers understood that that was not fair. If it was just the people,
I don't think that's why the founding fathers put the Electoral College in.
Oh, it was exactly why they did. They
I don't think documentation supports that.
All right. Well, maybe one of our listeners knows for a fact, but I think it was put in that way so that would protect the states, so that they would have the federal government had limited power over the states. In fact, any of the rights that were not specifically outlined in the Constitution belonged to the states. So that was one thing. The second thing was the federal government was concerned about one particular area of the country establishing a national religion, like what happened in England. And so they purposely made it so that the laws were such that couldn't happen. They wrote it in the Constitution. They made it so that any one individual state was not more powerful than another individual state by the way that they were elected. Now, part of the reason the Electoral College existed, frankly, was elitist. It was because the founding fathers didn't think that the average person was smart enough to know enough about the economics and the politics and everything that was going on. They didn't have the communication to be able to keep on top of all of that, and therefore could not make an informed decision. So part of the fact is our country was based on the concept that the people were stupid.
Yeah, I think a lot. I honestly think that was a large part,
right,
of what that was.
It was, but it was not that they were stupid, but that they were uninformed, and that is actually still part of what we're talking about, because the fact is that in those days nobody could afford, because the country was so dispersed, because people were so dispersed. I mean, within the country, that there was no way that somebody could be elected and go to each one of those states and campaign in those states and all those rural communities and all of those small towns and then educate everybody as to what's going on. Because remember, they don't have these newspapers coming in. They didn't have somebody telling them all of this stuff. So, and they're out trying to survive. So to some degree, it did make sense because the people would not be informed. So it would become a popularity contest. And that's not what the government wanted. They wanted informed decisions being made, and they wanted the federal government out of the lives of the states. So they realized that if it became a popular vote, a lot of uninformed people might make a bad decision. Today, it's not necessarily an uninformed people, and that's why people say, well, it should be a popular vote. We're informed now. We have a right. Well, we do, but we don't, right? We have a right to vote, and we have the right to be educated. But how many of us actually do that? How many people actually study these issues in detail, especially the financial and economic issues? How many people actually get into the budget to see where money's being allocated? How many people actually do all of those kind of things to be able to make a decision? How many people actually get in and look to see how some of these programs are going to be funded and where it's going to come from and what it's going to do to the budget, to the economics, or whatever? They go by what somebody tells them. They don't do the work themselves. Why? because they don't have time. They've got lives to live. It's complicated. They don't have the background to make those decisions. Frankly, it always amazes me that we're having attorneys make those decisions for us. Nothing against you attorneys out there, but I don't know where you get the financial background to be able to make these decisions for us. But anyway, but the fact of the matter is we are uneducated. So there is the potential that it's not like the old days where the people just didn't have an education. And they were uneducated because they didn't have an education. We are still uneducated today as a populace because we don't have the time to deal with complicated issues that are now much more complicated. And so as a result, we have to elect people, and we have to have the responsibility of people to represent us. That's what we do with our state. The state represents our interest in general to make sure our region or our state gets their rights represented. And that's what, the House does as a representation. Otherwise, why not just, if we really want to go with popular vote, why don't we just online, everybody vote on every bill? We could do that. I mean, how hard is that? So you just log on. We're going to vote today on immigration. Everybody log in at 2:00 and vote on immigration. Why don't we just do that? Well, the reason is because most of us don't have the time and don't have the knowledge to vote on all of that. So we vote for somebody else to do that for us. My argument is that the state should have some say in that, and it shouldn't just be somebody that we represented who pandered to us. And unfortunately, that's what a popularity contest becomes. So anyway, it's something that's been bugging me lately because I hear a lot of this, and it's really discouraging because I'm concerned about really what our fathers intended. And year after year, I watch our states' rights go away. And that has an impact, I think, on our quality of life. Anyway, that's my political spiel this morning, which didn't have anything to do with economics, so I apologize, and I won't make that disclaimer anymore before the start of the show. Right here on WSU, Digital 1450, Martin County's Heritage Station. Bye.